Hello, it's me, Cass, and I thought I would do something interesting. I thought I would start basically a podcast where I would just talk about whatever I'm feeling, you know? Talk about whatever's going on with me, which is kind of how I keep this channel anyway. Like, sometimes I'm in the mood to do book reviews, sometimes I'm in the mood to do tarot reviews, sometimes I'm in the mood to talk about the problems with religion. You know, you could get anything from this channel and from me. And I thought I would make it more organized so that I can find stuff easier and so that you can hear my opinions easier. And so this is where we are. Now, what are you looking at if you're looking at this and not just listening to it? I draw my own thumbnails. I have a visual arts degree in drawing studio. So I have an iPad, I Procreate, and I draw my thumbnails. And then I screen record that drawing, and that's what I'm talking over. So I guess I'll kind of explain what I'm doing before I get into like what I'm actually here to talk about. I'm pretty sure this recording, this audio, is going to go on my Samhain altar setup thumbnail, which is like a collection of spooky things. It's like some pumpkins with witch hats on them. It's a black cat, a black like candelabra, and then a bunch of ghosts that are just like peeking around. So basically how I do these thumbnails is I go on the internet, I look up reference material, I bring it into Procreate, and then I draw on top of it, color underneath the line work. You're gonna see me draw in hot pink. It's not gonna stay hot pink. I draw in hot pink on initial drawing parts because drawing in a bright color on top of a picture is much easier to see than if I was drawing in like a black, you know? So I choose to draw in hot pink. Other artists draw in different colors. I just like hot pink because normally I'm not drawing on top of something that's hot pink. So that means it's a very easy to read color for when I'm trying to figure out my line work. Later on, you'll see me turn the saturation down to basically nothing, I'm pretty sure, on my line work, and then you'll see it go black. That's how I turn it to black. But that's my little drawing. This is my screen recording of it. I thought it would be a good background to talk over. And no, I'm not talking about art, at least on this one. I have another podcast and I have another channel called Cass Makes Crafts. And then there's a podcast on there called Art School Archives. And I've made that as my separate art channel because I made that just for like the art girlies. For the people who aren't concerned with like daily life or like witchcraft or aren't readers or aren't interested in my opinions about other things. I have a whole art podcast. So like go check that out if you heard that have an art degree and want to know what the fuck that entails. That's over there. This is you're going to hear whatever I have to say this week podcast. Kind of in the style, I don't know, I've been listening to a lot of Brittany Broski's podcast recently. And I kind of love that. Her style of it, of you have no idea what the fuck she's going to talk about. And then she just starts talking about it and it's fun to listen to. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. So I was going over in my mind, I have a list of different things I want to talk about. And like two big things stood out as far as like my most recent things that I've wanted to talk about in my real life and I've talked about with other people. And so those are going to be the first two episodes of this pod. Also, I'm calling this the PaleWitchPod. I think that's cute. I think it's cute. Anyway, so the two things that happen, shit with Christians and shit with retail. Because I work part-time at a retail store. And it is an odd form of hell, let me tell you. And then also just this week, I made a fucking TikTok about it. But this week I got handed one of those like Christian like business card things. And this one was specifically Catholic, but I've gotten it from like all different like sects of Christianity, where they like hand you a card and it's like, come talk to my preacher, come call my priest, you're living in sin, like, you know, that shit. Like, they're trying to save you. Like, please go fuck yourself. This is toilet paper to me. And so I thought for today's episode, I would talk about how I feel about religion and where I am in my religious journey. And then in the next episode, we can talk about retail in general and how the fuck that is. I think the best way for me to start this and like to be this episode is to start I consider myself pagan. Let's just throw that one out there. I consider myself pagan, specifically like Celtic, Welsh pagan, but I'm also interested in like Norse. It's more of an eclectic spread, I guess. So I consider myself pagan, which is religious, but it's not structured, I guess is the best way I would say it. I hate structured religion. Hate it. Can't with it. And that's because of my own journey, which is what we're going into here. I have a full journey of being raised Baptist Methodist, and then that going into agnosticism, and then that going into practicing witch, and then that going into paganism. So it's a long story. I'm going to talk about specifically the agnostic to pagan side, because I think that's currently more interesting as I'm like promoting this as like a witch channel. Like, where does that come from? I will probably talk more about the Christianity side as this continues. But this is just for today. We're going to start at the agnostic and go from there. So basically, I was raised by Christian parents. One was raised Baptist, Southern Baptist, and one was raised Methodist. And then I was raised a mixture of the two because we moved around like 3 times, and each time we would have to find a new church. And so it like started off Baptist, and then it went Methodist, and then it was another Methodist. And like one time in there, we just didn't have a church because they didn't like any of the ones we went to. Like, it was a whole thing. By college, which is where this journey begins for me that I'm discussing, I was agnostic. Now, what is agnostic? Google, the Google herself, defines agnostic as a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of the existence or nature of God or of anything beyond material phenomena. And then they have a second definition that says a person who claims neither faith nor disbelief in God. And then basically the way I had it explained to me, and the way that I like was a part of it, I guess, of being agnostic, was that I'm not saying that anyone's belief is right or wrong. You believe that something exists. In general, that's kind of like the consensus I've seen, is there's some sort of a belief in a higher power, but there is no definition of it. And then, like, if people come to you from all these different religions, you're not denying their religion, and you're not saying that their religion's wrong, because there is no proof that their religion is wrong or right, because there's no proof that any religion is wrong or right, because we don't have like proof of gods, you know? We just have like books that say they exist and things like that. And so that's what being agnostic is you believe something, probably, but you're not going to put a name to it. You're not going to put a religion to it. you live your life day to day without any sort of like religions. I would say even really without spirituality, because I think once you start to lean towards spirituality, even if you aren't doing like deity work, I think that takes you out of the agnostic realm, because I think that puts you more into like the believing in like natural, like universal, cosmic reasons for things and stuff like that. So that's where I was. Something exists. I had rejected God. I had rejected the idea of like a God. And I had rejected the church. And I say those two things separately because the church is like the structure. It's like the way the religion is. The God is like the faith in the thing, right? I rejected them both. And I didn't care what anyone else believed. Everyone could be right, everyone could be wrong. It didn't bother me. And one of the interesting questions I would get when I would discuss this with people is, why are you just okay, A, not knowing, and B, if there is nothing? And it was very interesting to see like very, very like faith-driven people ask these questions and then me answer and be like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, it's very interesting to interact with people who their life has to have a purpose and it has to be sent from like a deity who like put them on this planet to do something. And then you sit there and you're like, that could be true, but I don't care either way. Because they look at you like you're crazy. Because they don't understand, like in my experience, they didn't understand how I could be okay with not knowing. Like, they need an answer. And I didn't. And honestly, I still don't. Even now that I'm pagan, I don't like need an answer. I'm also not, I have chosen a pagan path. But I'm not the type of person who's going to be like, this is the correct path. This is the shit that's real. I know this is right and y'all are wrong. I don't fucking know. I like this one. This one brings me some sense of peace. It's not a right or wrong thing. And I think with a lot of specifically Christians, it becomes a right or wrong thing. Like, my God is the only God. So, what if he is, what if he isn't? Like, he's not here. He's not doing anything. He's not helping you. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, the right or wrong of it, it's so unnecessary. Because I feel like religion and like faith is such a like individual, like internal thing, that the idea of it being like, this is right, there is one God, my book says so, and my book is better than your book. That whole argument is so absurd to me. Especially when your book is the newer book at Christians in their Bible with the New Testament. Like, why does it matter if there's more than one? Like, why? Why is monotheism so self-assured? What's wrong with polytheism? Why does it need to be one? What does it matter if there's other gods? If your God is doing all that you need him to do as like a god, or all that you would want him to do as a god, does it really matter if there's other gods somewhere else doing their own shit? Like, really? I don't know. I don't see how like other people's shit affects you. It doesn't. I do want to specify that I was agnostic, not atheist. And there is a difference, if anyone doesn't know. Atheist is you don't believe in any God at all. And that's what the Google says. And I take that to mean you don't believe in anything. You don't believe in like a higher power, period. And then I also see with a lot of atheism that you also find in atheist religions, like Satanism. Most people don't know. Satanism's fucking atheist. They don't actually worship Satan. Like the Church of Satan, that's a name. They don't worship Satan. They're atheists. They don't believe in God. No one knows that. No one fucking reads. No one fucking looks things up. The Church of Satan is not actually devil worshipping. The Satanic Temple is. And no hate to the Satanic Temple. I have no beef with Satan. But like that, people don't understand the distinction. It's always Satanism, and it's because freaking, what's his fucking name? LaVey was out here in like the 60s or something, making people mad. And that was like his whole fucking point. He was there to make you mad, and he got exactly what he wanted. Like, relax. Anyway, I was not atheist. I did believe in something. And I was also open to the idea of believing in something specifically. I was open to the idea of joining another religion. I was. I kind of figured that I would find my way back because I understood why people turn to religion. I had at least gotten that much out of going to church. I understood why. Like the sense of like peace that you have when you don't feel like you're the only one in the universe. Like it's a weird feeling of like you're not alone, which could also be construed to be like you're being watched, which is a lot of like the if you do this you'll go to hell sort of bullshit. But like if you take that like fear of like being watched or being judged or something like that out of it, you just look at it as you're not alone in this universe, or like maybe you have a purpose, like a true purpose. I can see how that is comforting. And that's why I never fully closed the door to be like, I will never join a religion again. Because I did understand that comfort and I was open to feeling it again. Even though I didn't really feel it in Christianity, I just understood that that's what some people liked it as. Like, there was never a comfort for me with being told that, like, God is there and he is watching. Like, that was always a creepy thing to me. That was never comforting. But I see how deities that you don't fear the wrath of could be comforting. If that makes sense. So, set the scene. I'm in college. It's like sophomore into junior year. I'm agnostic. I'm talking to people who are all the way from like pure atheists, true Christians, like all kinds of people. And we're just talking about religion. And it's college. And it's fucking art school. So we're not like hating on each other. We're like actually talking about it like fucking adults. And it was really cool. And it was really enlightening to see. And it was also very nice to talk to people who were very devout Christians who didn't look at me like I was a sinner. And who didn't act like it was like a personal slight against them that I like didn't believe in their God. That was so nice to see, and so nice to like get like someone who devoutly believes in what they believe in, and to not, but understood that that stops with them and they don't need to like push that on to other people in the conversation. That was really nice. So at this time, I had not done any of the religious research that I have currently done. I was not familiar with the pagan community at all. There were like two things that I knew from my small experience. So my basis for any form of modern day like paganism or witchcraft was a TV episode on like TLC or the History Channel or the Discovery Channel or one of them ass channels where like someone with a film crew will go and join a group for like a day and document it, right? It was one of them bitches. And someone with a film crew went and joined a group of Wiccans for a day. And I'm gonna tell y'all, they made them look stupid as fuck. Like, I remember watching that episode and being like, in the beginning, I was like, oh, this is cool. People are like actually trying to do witchcraft and shit, because I was like a Harry Potter nerd. I always wanted to be a witch. I always wanted to have magic. I loved that idea. I was like, holy shit, people are actually trying to do it. And then what they fucking showed in this like TV episode was just LARPing in a park. That is what it was. It was LARPing in a park. It was this group of grown adults like skipping around in a circle at the park, at like a public park in the daytime, in purple velvet robes from like Party City, with wands, like wooden wands, and just like saying shit and like chanting. They looked like LARPers that had lost their way. They looked fucking stupid. And I would say it's a 50-50 on the fault of the editing of the show and what this fucking group chose to show them. Like, I cannot put all of the fault on the TV crew, because these grown-ass people decided to go in purple velvet robes with the hoods up and skip around in a circle in the daytime in a public park. Like, y'all are not helping the community look rational. So I saw that and I was like, oh, they're stupid. And I also automatically assumed that Wiccan was it. Wiccan was the only paganism. Wiccan was the only form that existed, which I think a lot of people believe, because anyone who finds out I'm pagan, I always say pagan or witch. Those are the two words that I use. And immediately, any person who is like slightly familiar with like any of these terms will go, Wiccan? No, I am not. No, bitch. But I think Wiccans becoming like popular and becoming known, I feel like they pushed that so hard to try to counteract the satanic movement, because the satanic movement was causing chaos. And so I feel like the Wiccans were like, oh, we do good magic. We don't curse people. We don't do anything bad. We are good magic. We are good witches. Like, look at us. We are good for the community. We are not scary. Like, we do not worship the devil. Like, I feel like it was a very much, people saw Satanism as like black magic and Wiccan as like white magic. And it was like that battle. And then it became that the only two forms of like paganism or witchcraft that was out there is Satanism or Wiccan. And those are like the two shits. And it's a constant this like struggle of misinformation, because the idea of black and white magic is fucking stupid and racist. Like, it is. There is no like black and white magic. It's just magic. It's just like the craft. There is no like, oh, this is bad and this is good. Like, no. That's not how it works. Y'all are just adding like morals and like assumptions and all sorts of shit. It's the same reason that like I feel like white people magic, like Celtic, like, and white people like paganism, like Celtic paganism, like Norse people, like stuff like that, is seen as not scary. Whereas anything that's like darker, like as in skin tone, I mean, like hoodoo, voodoo, brujeria, like things like that are seen as scary. And I don't think they are. Are they closed practices? 100%. Now, what does that mean? Before I like go off on this tangent. If it's a closed practice, that means it's basically ethically closed or ethnically closed. Like, if you aren't a part of that ethnicity or if that world or if that group, you should not be practicing in it without an invitation. It's not that you shouldn't learn about it. information should be shared. You should learn about everything you could possibly learn about. But if you are not a part of a community that involves voodoo or hoodoo or whatever, you should not be trying to practice it without a proper invitation, because it's not for you. It's not. And so there's like, that's like a closed practice. Whereas a lot of white practices, a lot of European practices are open, which means anyone can join. You don't have to be Scandinavian or Germanic or Celtic to join. You can just choose to join. We're open to all. And I also think that idea leads people to think that closed practices are scarier. And they're not. They're just different. Like, that's the whole thing. It's not black and white. It's just fucking different. It's not good or bad. It's just different. And it's a load of shit. But that's like what you learn if you don't. It's what you learn and what you believe if you don't look into it, or you aren't surrounded by people who have educated themselves about it. And I wasn't surrounded by people like that. I didn't grow up with people like that. I grew up with fucking Christians. Anything that's not Christian is devil worshipping. The pagans are pagans. Like, I didn't grow up with people who were actually studying Christianity, right? I didn't grow up with people who were like, well, actually, Jesus wasn't born in December. Well, actually, a lot of these practices are actually stolen from pagan customs from when the Roman Empire invaded and spread Christianity across Europe. Like, I wasn't with people who told me that information. I found out a lot of this information from TV. Like fucking the History Channel, I'm pretty sure they probably still do it, but they would run these episodes where they would like deep dive into specific things in the Bible. And they would try to they would scientifically explain things, and they would historically explain things. Like, realistically, if there was a flood and there was a Noah's Ark, where would it have landed? Stuff like that. What would the goblet look like? I'm forgetting where things are. I'm forgetting Bible things. What would the 10 Commandments actually look like? Where would they be? It's like stuff like that. And so I was looking at it like scientifically, which was interesting. And then I distinctly remember one absolutely blowing my fucking mind. There were actually two, let me say. There was two that actually blew my fucking mind. One was a deep dive into the books of the Bible and how they got picked to be the books of the Bible. Because no one fucking talks about that. They were picked. They were handpicked after like Jesus died. They were handpicked. It was all written afterwards, and they were handpicked. Do you know what handpicked means? It means books got rejected. That idea was insane, because basically what I thought as a child in the church was that like God wrote the Bible or like some shit like that, or like one of the disciples did or some shit, and then they just like bound it all together once Jesus died, because they don't think, like, you don't think about stuff like that. You're not taught to, right? So then to watch this TV show and then be like, yeah, there were girls who wrote books of the Bible and it was like turned away. Like Mary Magdalene wrote a book of the Bible and it was rejected. Like, what? She's so important. But she's a woman, right? Like, that idea that there are untold stories blew my fucking mind. And then the other one that blew my mind is they did a deep dive on the painting of the Last Supper. And I love art history, y'all. Love it. And the main point that blew my mind from this episode is that there are 14 people in the painting. And you don't think about that. It's Jesus, his disciples, 12 of them, right? There's a girl, and it's assumed to be Mary Magdalene. And then there's like a theory that Jesus married her. And they like go through this whole thing and do like, they like analyze the painting and analyze the way that she's like leaning on a guy, and if you put her next to Jesus, she would actually be leaning on him. It was like this whole fucking thing that blew my mind, because I had seen that painting a billion fucking times, and I never knew there was a girl in it. It's insane. That's another tangent. But anyway, that is my understanding of it. These are my things. And then of course I had heard of Satanism. I did not know what I know now about Satanism. Like, now I've read the Satanic Bible and looked all through the Church of Satan's website, which is a giant Q&A. If anyone was wondering, it is a giant Q&A, and I want to do a video going through it because it is the most informative website I have ever been on. That bitch is like Wikipedia. But I didn't know any of this. I had just heard of Satanism. No one looked into it. No one looks into it. I just heard of it. And I was like, oh, they worship Satan. First of all, that's not true. And then second of all, obviously you're told that that's bad, right? And everyone's like freaked out about it. They're like, oh my God, demons and the devil. Ugh. And it's like, it's not the same. Anyway, that's what I knew, right? And then like the idea of paganism, I didn't understand that pagan was just not Christian, right? Like that's what it means. Like, okay, the literal definition from the Google is a religion other than one of the main world religions, specifically a non-Christian or pre-Christian religion. I didn't understand that that's what paganism meant. I didn't understand that it was literally just a term that meant not Christian. I thought it was like a specific thing. I thought it was like specifically like European, like Beowulf people. You know what I mean? Also, Beowulf was like messed with by Christians. That's a whole thing. Anyway, but I thought it was like Beowulf's people were like the pagans. No, it means any religion that's not fucking Christian, or that's not the main world religion, which obviously, like in our current world, the big three. Well, there's the big three monotheistic, but then there's also like huge polytheistic religions like Hinduism and stuff, but whatever, different discussion. So that was my understanding, right? And then I'm talking to these people at college, and I'm having really good conversations because I'm not being judged, and I'm not judging. Don't get me wrong, I'm not judging these like people that I went to college with for being Christians. I questioned it for sure, and I raised those questions to them 100%. But I wasn't like, oh my God, you're a Christian, I can't talk to you. I would never do that. If you don't shove it, like try to shove it down my throat, try to convert me, I don't care what religion you are. If you keep that and understand that that's like you and not me, and we can discuss it as much as you want, but you don't try to like push it on me, we cool with whatever. So then comes junior year. Junior year, I started to have an awakening. And when I wrote awakening in my notes, that just made me think of the book The Awakening, which I was hella disappointed by, and I do not want to do a review on because I was forced to read it, and I hated it because she did next to nothing and then swam off into the ocean, and that bothered the fuck out of me. And also, it was a slow read. I have many thoughts on classics anyway. So, a little bit more background. I had always been interested in folklore. I am basically Celtic and Germanic and like blood. Like, look at me, I'm white as white can be. You know, like I wear the zero foundation, right? And so most of my ancestors specifically come from Ireland and Germany, but it's a little sprinkling of all the white people over there in Europe, you know? And I had always been interested in folklore from the region. I love folklore in general, but I always specifically was interested in that folklore because it was like my heritage folklore, you know? So I wanted to know specifically more about that area. And I had always loved folklore. I'd always loved magic. I love the escapism of fantasy, and I love the idea of having powers to manipulate like things around you. And then you find that a lot in folklore, of course. So that's also what drew me to it. So in one of my, well, actually my last drawing class before I did my senior studio, I did a 6-piece collection of illustrations where I looked up the Celtic origins or like Celtic versions, because there are other like versions and other origins of these stories, of specifically stories that Disney had told. And I was looking for specifically princess stories because I feel like those are like the most popular Disney stories. And so I wanted to see the difference because, of course, you know, like there's the Grimm fairy tale versions that are like, obviously Disney makes everything less gruesome, you know, but I wanted to see other versions of the stories besides just the Grimm fairy tales too, because there's like a billion different Cinderellas, you know, like all sorts of shit. And I ended up doing 2 pieces each on 3 different stories, on Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, and Snow White. And I'm not saying those are like the original ones, because I don't know, because when you're trying to look this up, it's very confusing. Because different people are saying that they're the original, and it's like debating with each other. So that's why I'm saying these are older versions. I don't know if they're the originals. But because I did this project and I did a lot of research on this project, I was like, what if I continued my research? Because to go into senior studio, you have to have a plan as to what your thesis will be, which in an art setting, your thesis is a big gallery show where you have to have multiple pieces. They're usually along the same line of some sort of like dialogue that you're trying to get across. And I was like, what if I do my senior show on Celtic folklore? That would be so cool. So that's where it started, where I was like going into Celtic folklore. It started with folklore. And it started with those Disney stories. And then for my senior studio, I started looking up, I went to The Little Mermaid. And I was like, let me look up real versions, like real stories of mermaids. And I looked up specifically Irish and Scottish versions. And I stuck with the Irish one, which they're called Marrows. And they're green and they have red hats. And they're interesting, if anyone wants to look that one up. So I started my thesis there. And then after I did a piece on that, I had gotten like Irish, Celtic in general folklore books, and I had just been looking up Celtic folklore because I had been looking up other stories because I didn't know what story I wanted to do my next piece on. And something that kept coming up was the Welsh goddess of love. Don't ask me why. It just did. The Welsh goddess of love is named Bronwyn. If I'm even saying that correctly, who knows? But she comes up a lot in my research for whatever reason. And I was like, actually, some unknown goddesses could be cool. And so I start looking up information specifically on Bronwyn, because at first I thought I was just going Irish, but I expanded it to Celtic as I went into this goddess research, because for whatever reason I was drawn more towards Welsh goddesses than Irish ones. So it started with Bronwyn, and then as I just did research on her specifically, I found out that she's one of many Welsh goddesses that are all part of the same collection of Welsh folklore called, I'm going to say this the best way I know how, Mabinogion, maybe not. But it's a collection of Welsh folklore, fairy tale, whatever you want to call it, stories. And there's 2 different main versions that people look at. There's one like about 1700s and one like after 1700s. And the only difference is the addition of one story at the end. Basically, sometime in, I believe, the 1700s, a Welsh princess translated the stories into modern Welsh. I'm not sure on those specifics on that one. But she translated the stories and then she added one more, it wasn't like a story she made up. She added another old folklore story. So that brought the total of goddesses up to 5 it's the 11th story, I think. Either 11th or 13th. It's been a hot minute since I've looked at this research, okay? So you're the 11th story in the book or the 13th story in the book. It's the last one. And the story isn't about the goddess. The goddess is the mother of a super famous Welsh poet from like Welsh lore called Taliesin. I don't know. But he's a famous Welsh poet. But his mother is a goddess. Okay, we'll get to her. And I also, in my research, find out that these goddesses are all seen as different aspects of like triple goddess, which is you're looking at, it's when you have the 3 moons. Like anytime you see a picture of the 3 moons, it means like the triple goddess aspect. So you have the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And so it's like the 3 different like main stages of like female life, basically. And all of these goddesses were seen as different versions of the first 4, the ones who weren't the additional goddess, were seen as different versions of the maiden and the mother. And then the last goddess is always seen as the crone. And I was trying to do just the 3, but I kept getting conflicting accounts of who was maiden and who was mother. So I decided to do all 5 because they're all considered goddesses of Avalon. So what is Avalon? Avalon, in the lore, connects to King Arthur, Arthurian lore, which all these technically connect back to King Arthur because anything Welsh lore is going to connect back to Arthur because Camelot was believed to be in Wales. And the island and the lake, like I've always seen it as like a lake with like some island or some like land in it where King Arthur finds Excalibur and where he goes, where the Lady of the Lake takes him to Avalon is always like, it's in Wales. It's believed to be in Wales, right? And so Avalon is like the other world. Because in Welsh lore, it's not like a heaven or a hell. You have the other world, right? And the other world is where like fae creatures are. It's where gods are. It's where goddesses are. It's where the dead go. It's like it's a collection of everything, and it's not a bad place. It's just the other world, right? And so it's believed that he was taken to the other world, and basically that like where the Lady of the Lake is, where this like area of Camelot was like a thin place in the Vale, where you could like pass between worlds, basically. So loved all of that because I fucking love Arthur lore, right? Because fantasy, right? So I was like, fuck me all the way up on that one. So I'm researching all 5 of these goddesses now. I'm reading their stories. I'm looking up stuff on them. And I start to realize 2 things. 1, online they're called goddesses. And then 2, in the book, they aren't. And that's an important distinction because during this time, I was also taking a British literature class in college as part of an English minor. And I fucked with this class so hard. My teacher was fucking amazing. His name was Andy. Fucking go off, Andy. But one of the things that we read was a few stories out of the Mabinogion. And so when he brought it up in class, I was like, holy shit, I'm literally doing my thesis on this fucking shit. I loved it. Like, you do not understand. And so he was talking to me about it. And then he pointed out the distinction that I was calling them goddesses based off my research online. In the book, they're not called goddesses. Because in the lore, they're seen more as fae. They're seen more as like basically elvish creatures who have powers. And they're not like deity figures. They aren't like worshipped, right? There's like a distinction there. And he didn't like that I was calling them goddesses. And so I was like, I'm calling them goddesses because everyone online calls them goddesses. They don't call them like elves or like fae or anything like that. They call them goddesses. Like Bronwyn, the goddess of love. And he goes, that's different. Like that's not taken from the source material. And of course, he's a literature major, so he's source material, right? So I look into it a little more, and I see the paganism side of it, which I didn't know existed. And I saw it specifically with Rhiannon. The song about her. Who sings it? Damn, I don't remember. But there's like a song. Rhiannon? Is that how she says it in the song? It's a witch song. Anyway, I saw it specifically with her as being like actively talked about as a goddess, not like past tense, like present tense. And that's what showed me the like modern paganism. That's what started to show it to me, where there were people who were doing deity work with these figures, and they weren't seen as just what the literature says, where they were like fae. They were seen as gods and goddesses. And that was so cool to me. That was so enlightening. I didn't jump in. Now that took some time. I didn't jump in. But I now knew the information, and that was important. So for those wondering, what are all of the goddesses? Because I've only told you two. Bronwyn, Rhiannon, Erenhad. I'm American and don't know how to say any of these. Erenhad, Ludwed, probably also wrong, Caradwyn. Those are the 5, right? And now, this comes up later, but one of these bitches stuck with me. And it was Caradwyn. And Caradwyn is the crone goddess aspect. And she is from the added on story. So the story isn't about her. She's not a main character at all. She's literally only in the beginning. Because literally she like births him, and she doesn't even birth him correctly. That's a wild story. That's a whole other thing. Welsh folklore is absolutely insane. But anyway, she births him, and then she's like out of the story. Like that's it. And then the whole story is about the poet, right? So she has the least shit about her, and she's the crone aspect. And I'm like, what? 20, 21 when I'm writing this? No kids, obviously. So I'm still in my maiden aspect physically. So I don't know, like I didn't understand why I favored Caradwyn, because I did favor her. And it shows in my art that I favored her. And that comes up later, because that makes sense later. But I was very confused why I wasn't favoring like Branwyn or Bronwyn, however you want to say it, because like she was the first one I found, right? Or like one of the other ones that are like a maiden aspect or like a younger aspect. And it's not to say that Caradwyn is like described as like a hag or some shit. Like she's not described as like old and ugly. It's just that she's the knowledge side. She's the waning moon. She is the old wise woman, you know? So, go through all of this. I'm doing this work. When am I doing this work? What year, you may ask? 2019 to 2020. Because I didn't decide. I was born at an unfortunate time. Mathematically. I was born in 98. I'm 25. But I went straight from, first of all, I started school early. Like I skipped a year of preschool. Started school early. It's a downhill slope from there. Anyway. So that means that I graduated college because I went straight from high school to do my 4 years of college. It means that instead of graduating in 2021, like I was technically supposed to, I graduated in 2020. We can all see why that was a bad plan, right? That was not a good plan. Anyway, I graduated in 2020, May of 2020 specifically. And so the thing that you work 4 years on, that I have, like, I had put my blood, sweat, and tears into these pieces, into my thesis. I had worked for literal years on my thesis. I had gotten tattoos about my thesis. This had like changed my life. Was my life purpose, right? Went home for spring break, never came back to campus, okay? Did my thesis as a PowerPoint presentation to 3 professors from my parents' dining room table, okay? That fucked me up. 2020 fucked everyone up. This is my story. Fucked me up, okay? Because of that, and because of how hard that hit me, I stopped drawing. Drawing was my fucking life's passion. Life passion, okay? I had wanted to be an artist and I had wanted to draw specifically since I could pick up a crayon, okay? My life's passion. 2020 hit me so hard that I stopped. And so at 2020, and we went home at the end of March. And then by went home, I mean we got sent home. I had to go back and live with my parents. I had a studio job lined up. That shit fell through, never happened. I had to get a retail job. I'm still at retail. Love that for me, but that's what I get for getting a fun major. Was living at my parents' house. Not happy about that. Working a retail job. Also not happy about that. Lost all want of art, all sense of purpose in art, right? So, continuing down the line a little bit, like timeline wise, in November of 2020, my then boyfriend, now husband, got a job in his field. He is a computer engineer. He finally managed to get a job in his field because obviously finding jobs is god awful during 2020. And he moved us to the coast. I'd always lived in the South. Now I live on the coast of the South, right? And so we officially moved in December 2020. Still in retail. I'm still in retail to this day, but anyway, at the time, still in retail. And during the beginning of 2021, I started to have this pull towards spiritualism. And I want to specify that that's not deities. It's not gods and goddesses. It's like nature, natural things, like fairies, like gnomes, elementals, things like that is what I started to get a pull towards, like the energy of everything around you is what started to interest me, what started to pull me. And then from that, I started to get this weird draw towards tarot cards. Like I started to really want to read tarot. And I had never wanted to. I had known that tarot cards existed and I had known that they were like fortune telling cards, but I had never like wanted a deck or anything. And then around May, I went and bought myself the cheapest deck of tarot cards that I could find at Books A Million and a guidebook. And it was called like The Only Tarot Guide You'll Ever Need, or like some shit like that, like a little guidebook, okay? And I read that book cover to cover. And first of all, it was actually very insightful. It actually wasn't a bad guidebook. I do still enjoy that book. And it did help a lot with learning the basics of tarot and learning the basics of like what each card means and kind of it gave you like kind of like, I wouldn't say tools, but it wasn't like, it would give you like half a page description of like each card. So that's something like, it's a basis to start off on. It's not giving you like a full understanding, but it's giving you something to start with, right? It was a very good beginner book. But at the beginning of this tarot book, it actually had a little history section where it talked about the history of tarot cards and how they connect to the history of witchcraft. And that shit was fascinating to me. Fascinating. I was like, holy fuck, witches, right? So now I'm back on the witch train and I go, let me look back in to like that witchcraft stuff that I had seen on TV, because I feel like that wasn't right. I feel like that wasn't a good representation from like what I've learned since then. And so I did some research and I was looking up like good beginner, like get into the craft books, right? And I was also looking for some stuff on like Wiccan, because I was like, is Wiccan just fucking LARPing in a park? Like, I wanted to know. It's not, if you're wondering. Like, you could do that as a Wiccan, but that's not the whole thing, right? And I found a book called The Truth About Witchcraft by Scott Cunningham. And Scott Cunningham is a well-known and very well, I would say, like, received Wiccan author. And so basically The Truth About Witchcraft, it gives a history of like witchcraft and like folklore magic and stuff like that, and a history of Wicca. And then it like separates the two into like two different sections of the book. Now, does the book lean heavily towards Wicca and like Wiccan ideas and ideals of like what you should be using like your craft for? Yes. And how you can tell that something is Wiccan in ideals is usually that they're going to tell you not to do anything that could harm people. No cursing, no hexing, no jinxing. Don't do anything to someone without their permission. Stuff like that. And then it's also going to have a lot to do with numbers and a lot to do with, and by numbers, I mean like you say something 3 times, you tie 7 knots, or like something like that during the practice, like whatever you're doing. And then also it's going to have a heavy emphasis on the idea of what goes around comes around, or like karma. And it's not specifically karma, because I see karma as like you get what you deserve. It's more like it'll come, like there's like a threefold rule where like whatever you do to someone will come back to you threefold. So you only want to do something good to them so that only goodness comes back to you, because if you do something bad, it'll be worse on you. Like that sort of thing. Those are like the things that you see in Wiccan. That's not to say that they're bad if you are Wiccan or if that's what you believe. That's just not my shit. So does it lean heavily on that? Yes. But was it a really good book to introduce the idea of both sides of being like Wiccan and being like folk? Yes, it was very good at doing that. I recommend this book. I think Scott Cunningham is a great author, and I think he's very informative, and I think he's a good read. Even if you aren't Wiccan, he still has informational books. Like he has books on herbalism and like all sorts of shit. Like, something having Wiccan ideas doesn't mean that it's not going to have like universal information in it. You know what I mean? So found that book and I was like, holy shit, this is cool. Wicca's not for me. Did discover that through that book. But holy shit, this is so cool. I love this like idea. I love this world. So then I go on YouTube and I'm like, there has to be witches doing shit, right? Boy, oh my God, I had no idea. They're all over it. You just got to get to WitchTube. WitchTube. I say that like it's witch talk, but that too. I got on witch talk. And specifically on YouTube, I found this girl called Mint Fairy. Gorgeous, beautiful. She calls herself our fairy godmother. And she has so many videos that are like good beginner videos on like, what do you do with crystals? What do you do with candles? Like, what is like following the fairy path? Like all of this stuff. And it's very like inclusive. It's not hating on anything. It's just very informational. And then she also has this like green vibe, because she normally has like green hair, and she has like a green room where she like does all this stuff. And I find green a very calming color. So I was like, this is amazing. I'm hooked. If y'all want a good fairy person who talks about all kinds of like craft and stuff, go see Mint Fairy. She was, I love her to this day. Love her content. But So all those things together, I was like, I want to be a witch. And some people don't want to be called a witch, and that's your prerogative, but you're a witch. Like, basically you are. Like, I understand that it's not Harry Potter. It's not flicking a wand and like turning a cat into something, you know? It's not that shit. The main idea is like energy shifting. And so you're taking energy from items. Like, that's why you have like crystals or herbs or like stuff like that. Everything is this idea that everything has energy. And basically, witches are manipulating the energy to do what we want. To get like, it's like intense manifesting is like, I think a good way to describe it, because it's energy manipulation. You're not like throwing shit into a cauldron and then making like an immortality potion. Like, it's not like that. It's shifting the like universal tides, like shifting luck in your favor, shifting money towards you. It's like these big ideas of stuff, as opposed to like, I'm gonna turn him into a frog. Like, it's not shit like that. It's not Harry Potter. It's tangible things. It's believing that everything has energy, and so like, therefore, if you collect things of the energy you want, it will draw in more of that energy towards you. So if you collect a lot of things that have like prosperity, green, money energy, it'll draw money towards you. It's like that's kind of the like idea. And I consider that witchcraft. Some people consider that like spiritualism or like whatever. It's witchcraft. On like, it is. Like, I understand that there's a stigma with saying that, but who cares? Just because something's stigmatized doesn't mean it's bad or should be stigmatized, you know? So, witch, practicing witch. And the difference between like witch, practicing witch, is practicing is like you're actually doing stuff. Like, you actually are mixing herbs and doing something. You're getting crystals, putting them on an altar. Like, you're doing something. You're not just like believing it, like you're actively doing something, right? So this was witch. This was not yet pagan. It was not quite there yet. That came next. But as I discovered this, I started collecting tarot decks, learning more about tarot, still actively learning more about tarot. There's 78 cards, and it's hard to like memorize all the different ways that they can be read, all the different things they can mean, figuring out like, I don't know. Tarot's complicated. I feel like tarot is it takes time, and it takes getting used to the cards. So I'm still not there. I'm much better than I was, but I'm still not. I can't like just have a deck with no guidebook and pull some cards and be like, so this is what it's saying. Like, I need some assistance. But so I'm collecting tarot decks, start collecting crystals, start collecting other supplies like herbs and stuff. And I continue that through the end of 2021. And in January 2022 is when I started to do deity work. I had considered it. I had before this time. I considered it like fall into winter of 2021 because I realized that Caradwin was there, right? Caradwin was around, and she was sticking in my head. She had stuck in my head for years. I had discovered her in college, and then she never left, and she was always my favorite, and I never knew why. And then it started to occur to me, it may be because I'm supposed to be talking to her, or maybe because I'm supposed to be like interacting with her in some way, right? And so I had thought about it, and then I had done some research on like deity work and things like that, but I wasn't ready to like go in because I didn't know how much devotion that took. And I didn't know how much I needed to like do for that, because I also feel like I was still thinking of it as almost like a Christian thing, where it's like, okay, if you believe in something, now you gotta believe, and you gotta like dedicate yourself, and like, you know, whatever the fuck. It's not like casual. I don't say casual as like a bad thing. I say casual as like, it's not something where your life revolves around it, you know? And also, I didn't want to do deity work without an altar, at least some sort of altar space to the deity. Because I felt like at least that was necessary to give them like a place in my home, a like place to be, right? If I was trying to like interact with them, I felt like they needed a place to be. And I was living in a 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment with my, were we married yet? No, we weren't married yet. Fiance. We were fiance at this point. And I was like, there's no space. And we were planning on moving to a bigger apartment sometime the next year. So I was like, when we move, I'll make an altar space and I'll start it. And that's kind of what I had decided by January 2022. And in January, I had decorated our apartment for Christmas. And so in January, I was taking down our Christmas decorations and putting back up my like normal decorations. And recently, in this time, over like December into January, Carolyn had been showing up more. And I had been like, girl, I know, but like chill. Like she was showing up on TikTok, she was showing up in folklore books I was reading, she was showing up a lot. And I was like, this is clearly a sign. But like chill. But that's not something for me to decide, as it turns out. Because as I was putting away my Christmas decorations one day, I have this like big ass white snow globe. I really like snow globes. I collect them. Okay. I fucking love snow globes. So I have this big ass white snow globe that has a white like fir tree in the center. And it's like covered in snow. So it's pure white. And it like lights up with LED lights. And it's like heavy as shit. And I love it. So anyway, I had this. And it took up like a decent amount of space. It was like on top of a bookshelf, like one of those like 3-foot tall bookshelves. And it took up like half the bookshelf, like on top. So I take the snow globe, I put it in its box, like move it off, put it in its box. And I turn around and I look at the space there because I had stuff to put in that space. Like I had other decorations to put in that space. I look at the space and then all the thought goes out of my head. This all happens at once. All the thought goes out of my head. The word altar spelled out in all caps appears in my mind. Don't know why. That's how it appeared. But it was the word altar in English, ALTAR, spelled out, all caps, appeared in my head as I was looking at this spot. And it wasn't like shouting, but it was caps. And that was like a second or two of just that, and then it went back to normal. Like I went back to normal. And I was like, okay, so I see that I'm supposed to be doing this now. The deity work begins today. That's what I took that as. So I, instead of putting other decorations in this like little half of a bookshelf top, I made a tiny, tiny altar to Carolyn. And as soon as I made that altar, like within the next 2 days, I started drawing again. And for those of you who don't know, Carolyn is a goddess of like many things. She's kind of an overarching goddess. But one of her main things is she's a goddess of inspiration. And she has a cauldron of like wisdom and knowledge, right? But the inspiration one is like the kicker here. Because I had lost all inspiration with all art, or all purpose with art. I had stopped drawing. And then as soon as I set up this altar, it's back. I have all these ideas. I want to start doing artistic things again. It's like I start to go back to the headspace that I was in college, where I was like super inspired and super excited to work with my art and like stuff like that. So that was very affirming to me, and it wasn't scary at all. Like seeing like altar pop up in my head, it didn't scare me. It wasn't like yelling at me. I was never fearful. And to this day, I have never been fearful of like anything like that. It was just, I wasn't listening. and someone was trying to talk to me. And that's not, I didn't take that as scary. I didn't take that as like mean or aggressive. I took that as she was trying to reach out. And as soon as I listened, suddenly what I had lost came back. And so to this day, now I'm in a bigger apartment. So now Caradwin has a bigger altar. And I still do deity work with her. And that is why I consider myself pagan and not just a practicing witch. Because I think once you add in the deity aspect, the working with what you consider like a god, a goddess, or anything like that aspect, I think it becomes religious and not just spiritual. So that's why I consider myself pagan. Caradwin's not my only deity. I can talk about the other ones later. This I want to focus on her because this is specifically about her. She's what got me into this. But currently, I consider myself Celtic pagan, or Welsh specifically, because Caradwin's the one who pulled me into this. I felt this like really strong connection to Welsh folklore because of that, and then like Welsh pagan ideals because of that. That's where I consider myself. I'm also interested in Norse and a few other forms as well, and am actively doing research in them as well. But that's where I am currently. That's what I consider myself. And that also means I'm still very new to this. Everything I know is from the internet and books and talking to people and like going out and finding like apothecary or like metaphysical shops near me and talking to people there. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm very much in a learning stage. I don't consider myself an expert on literally any aspect of any of this. And I am happy to learn and am enjoying the learning stage. So from here, I've started to get more interested in how paganism ties into the different religions, where different religions like have taken pagan stories and like meshed them together, like specifically Christianity with that. I have a lot of interest in the history of like Christianity and like Judaism, because like obviously Judaism came before Christianity, and just I have a lot of interest in that because of how it spread. And I find that very interesting to me because like I said earlier, like Beowulf was messed with by Christian settlement. Like Christian settlement in the area affected so many things that people don't really talk about, because you need to like, I feel like you don't really talk about it unless in like an academic setting. Like, I guess I'll tell you what the Beowulf one was. In Beowulf, there's a mention of a god capital, like capital G, which means monotheistic. And Beowulf is one of the oldest stories ever written in Old English, which is why it's like so important to like English literature basically. But it was written in Old English once Old English was written down. It's from earlier. We don't know how far back, but it's from earlier. It's an oral tale, like an oral story that was written down later. And it was written down once the Roman Empire had already come and gone for like hundreds of years, is when it was actually written down. And so the whole tea is that the actual story of Beowulf would have had polytheistic beliefs, not monotheistic beliefs, because the like Celts were polytheistic, not monotheistic. What introduced them to monotheism was the Roman Empire coming and bringing Christianity with it. So that's what I mean by like it was messed with by Christianity. Okay, in my notes, I have 2 more points, so I'll hit those and then we will wrap this episode up because I've talked for a long time. I think there's 2 big ways that people are coming into like the new age witchcraft pagan setting. And I am a part of that for sure. Like, as I said, this started in 2021 for me, and it's 2023 when I'm making this, so 2 years. But I think the 2 big ways I'm seeing people come into this is either they were born into it, they're from families who practice it, but now they're allowed to talk about it because it's always like some form of like paganism, witchcraft, whatever has always existed, but it's not very often that it's been okay to discuss and like culturally accepted. And so I think that because it has become so mainstream, it's now culturally acceptable to talk about. So I think people are now able to talk about it. And then I also see a lot of it as leaving the church, specifically Christians, leaving and finding paganism, which I am clearly in that group, but almost everyone I meet is in that group as well, because there is such a draw from such a structured religion as Christianity and such a religion that is based on like fear of going to hell, fear of God's wrath, like fear, being so scared about anything and everything. And then finding something like witchcraft or like a pagan religion where it is not based off of fear, it's based off of understanding, and it's not, you're not having to worry about things. It's just existing. And I feel like there's such freedom in that, and that's the draw of it. And that's why I think the resurgence is good. That's why I think like the new age stuff is good. Is some of it bad? Is some of it too commercial and it's just crystal girlies making money? Sure. But is some of it good because it's keeping the craft alive? Also, yes. So I do like it. It brought me into it. So I can't be mad at it, you know? And then my last point is, how open am I about this? Clearly I'm putting it on the internet. So I am open to an extent. Now, this is technically a second channel for me. My main channel is my art channel, my Cass Makes Crafts channel. And I'm not nearly as open on that channel. I do talk about like witchcraft and like different stuff like that on that channel, but not as openly as I will discuss it here. And that's just something I feel is good for me. Not necessarily necessary, but I think it's good for me. And then I also just think there's some people who only want art content and some people who only want like Witcher book content. So separate it for them, you know? But I'm going to talk about much more real shit here than I am on my art one. And not everyone knows about my second channel. But pretty much everyone knows about my art channel, as far as like people I know in real life. So that's kind of where I'm at. Will that change? Will I become equally open on both? We'll see. I don't know. I'm 25. Who the fuck knows what's gonna happen? Anyway, that is my rant for today about agnosticism, Christianity, paganism, my journey with it. And I'll see you guys next time. And next time, we're going to talk about something completely different. We're going to talk about retail. So, see you guys then.